Jennifer and Art in the morning on KSDK Channel 5. Art Holliday is a reporter for Channel 5 and a good friend of the show. Art, good morning.
Good morning, McGraw. How are you?
We are doing great. We have been following your Johnny B. Goode story for a couple of years now, and you have finally completed the documentary?
The documentary, I would say, is about 95% complete. I mean, we have a complete film. We're tinkering with it right now.
Right.
We just had a test screening a couple of weeks ago, and your partner, Kelly Jackson, was there.
Yes.
Amongst about 20 people that watched it and filled out a questionnaire to get some feedback as we continue editing. So, yeah, it's a very mature project. Right now, we're licensing music and film clips and documentary clips and trying to find out what the ultimate price tag is going to be.
Right.
And then that's, and then we've got to figure out where the money's coming from.
So the movie is a documentary on
Johnny Johnson, the
Johnny
Rock
Johnson.
and Roll Hall of Famer.
Who was the man behind, who was Johnny and Johnny B. Goode?
He was Johnny and Johnny B. Goode. The backstory of that song is that, of course, Johnny's longtime association is with Chuck Berry. Johnny Johnson actually hired Chuck Berry in 1952, and ultimately Berry took over the band, and they made musical history right here in St. Louis. But when Berry and the band would tour, they would be on these rock and roll caravans where they had all the hit makers of
Sure.
the day, and everybody would play their hit song, and they'd be done for the night. And Johnny would, in whatever city they were in, would go off in search of a jazz or a blues club where he could sit in. He'd start playing and start drinking, having a good time. And on multiple occasions, he was left behind in the city that they were in. And and at one point, as the legend goes, Chuck Berry went to Johnny Johnson and said, "Johnny, why can't you just be good?" So the song, in some ways, is a backhanded compliment
Right.
to a musician who had a good time on the road.
Right. Now, Johnny Johnson has since passed away.
He died in 2005.
And they had a very tumultuous relationship, the two of them?
It depends on how you look at it. In the early 2000s, Johnny Johnson was convinced by people around him to sue Chuck Berry for songwriting credit. And ultimately, the case was thrown out because the statute of limitations had long passed. Johnny waited decades too late to make that claim. But even the attorneys on both sides agree that their personal relationship never really suffered. They played together after that lawsuit, and clearly they made musical history together.
Right.
But yeah, there was a lawsuit. There was an attempt to make the legal argument that Johnny Johnson was the co-writer of many of the most famous songs in rock and roll.
Now, at one point, they did stop playing together because in your documentary, which I have to say is extraordinary work, he was driving a van, right, Johnny?
Right. Well, and that's a big part of Johnny's story is the comeback. Because by the mid-1980s, Johnny Johnson was forgotten by the music industry. He was driving a senior citizens bus here in St. Louis. And there's a great story in the film that goes all the way back to the early days of the Rolling Stones. The very first keyboard player for the Rolling Stones was a guy named Ian Stewart, who was a big Johnny Johnson fan. And he's the one who told Keith Richards and Mick Jagger and the other Rolling Stones band members, that piano player you love so much with Chuck Berry, that's Johnny Johnson. So then fast forward to the mid-1980s. Johnny's driving a senior citizens bus, not making a living as a musician. And Ian Stewart, for some reason, pulls Keith Richards aside and says, "Don't forget, Johnny Johnson is still alive in St. Louis. You need to go find him." And Keith Richards is looking at him like, "What are you talking about?" A few months later, Ian Stewart dies, and Taylor Hackford, the movie director, picks up the phone and calls Keith Richards. "I'm doing a film in St. Louis on Chuck Berry and his 60th birthday and his music and his legacy. I want you to be the band director." Well, what's the first thing that pops into Keith Richards' head? Don't forget, Johnny Johnson's still alive in St. Louis.
Right.
And he convinced Chuck Berry and convinced Taylor Hackford to put Johnny in the film. And Johnny tore it up, as
And that was his rebirth.
Eric Clapton said in the film.
Right.
And the rest is history. Johnny got a second career.
Art Holliday, our guest, did the documentary Johnny Be Good, KSDK reporter. He's well-known, well-respected here for forever. Michael McDonald
Yes.
helped you with this.
Years ago, I interviewed Michael McDonald, so he is interviewed in the film. And then early in the year, I was approached by several people, and I have to give them a shout-out on the radio. Mike Meese, who's a drummer and producer, Dan Duncan, who is a childhood friend of Michael McDonald, and Steve Scorfina, who played guitar in Pavlov's Dog and REO Speedwagon. They all came to me and said, Michael McDonald wants to record a new version of Johnny Be Good, and we're going to put it on digital download platforms, sell it, and try to raise money to finish your film. I mean, this was like a gift from heaven.
Right.
I can't take credit for it. It dropped into my lap. And
Sure.
I have to thank those guys publicly for doing that. But Michael McDonald recorded his voice tracks. We got David Sanborn. He does a saxophone solo on this recording. We've got Jimmy Vivino, the band leader from Conan O'Brien's band, playing guitar. Steve Scorfina is playing slide guitar on it. Obviously I'm going to say it's a great recording,
Sure.
but, you've got some really top-notch musicians. The cool thing for me is that these guys are putting their name on the line for this film.
Sure.
And Michael McDonald also narrates it.
Michael McDonald doubled down after he recorded the song. He said, I'd be interested in narrating if you have an interest. And I'm like, you're Michael McDonald. Of course I have an interest. And so I went down to Nashville about a month ago and did his narrator tracks, and he does a great job on the film.
So what do you want people to know? What do we need to know? What do we need to do to help get this movie to the finish line?
On pretty much every major digital download platform and streaming service, whether it's iTunes, Amazon, CD Baby, you can download a new version of Johnny Be Good. And after we pay the expenses that it took to get this recording off the launching pad, the rest of the money will come to the film and help pay for what I expect are going to be really expensive licensing fees for recorded music
Sure.
and film clips and documentary clips.
Yeah.
But these are the elements that showcase how brilliant Johnny Johnson was.
Right. Last thing, are you a big musician, or are you the storyteller in this? Will you come to this because you're a St. Louisan, or music, or a story?
Well, the backstory on how I wound up doing this, a colleague of mine and Kelly's, Tony Chambers, he's one of our videographers and editors at KSDK. He's also a musician. And he was telling me about a recording session that Johnny Johnson was having probably in 2003. And as he was leaving my desk, he turned around and he goes, I know you're into making documentaries. Johnny Johnson might make an interesting documentary. And so that's where the seed was planted. I have a great respect for St. Louis's musical history.
Right.
And because of Chuck Berry and Johnny Johnson, St. Louis is one of the birthplaces of rock and roll as much as any other city in America. And so one of the things that I hope this film will accomplish when it comes out is just reminding people that there's a great musical history right here. The music those guys made influenced the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and everybody else that came after.
From the first day you started shooting, how long ago was that?
The first thing we shot was in 2004, and then Johnny died a year later. And I wasn't sure what effect that was going to have. And as
Right.
it turned out, a lot of things happened. I was approached by some local arts organizations about grants.
Right.
A lot of people started saying yes.
But it's 11 years and still going strong.
Yeah.
So it's a testament.
That's a story
to,
in and of itself.
Absolutely, it's a testament to you and everything else. Art Holliday, how do people find out more information about the movie?
jjthemovie.com is the website. The very first page that comes up will have links to buying the digital download. There's blog entries. There's a trailer there. There's photographs, the whole nine about the film.
JJ Movie?
JJ the Movie.
jjthemovie.com. Art Holliday, it was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me on.
Oh, my goodness. And when it's finally done, you're always welcome here.
I appreciate it.
Here, not at Westport.
There you go.
852 KTRS.